Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Serious, what is the creepiest thing you have experienced that you cannot rationalize or explain? I like to think I am a rational person. I do not really believe in ghosts and whatnot, but your comment made me remember something from when I used to take care of my niece and nephew when they were little, age 4 and 5 at the time. My sister's house was in the middle of nowhere. An old, creepy farmhouse at the end of a long private road, surrounded in every direction by woods and fields. There was nobody around us at all. Super creepy place at night. It was evening and I was taking turns giving the kids their baths and dressed for bed. My 4-year-old nephew was watching TV in the living room on the opposite end of the house from where I was in my sister's room getting my 5-year-old niece dressed for bed. As I was getting her in her PJs, she is staring out the window into the dark backyard completely fixated on something with a concerned look. I asked her what she is looking at out there, and she says, "Those kids on our trampoline." Obviously, I look and see nobody out there at all. Now you are thinking she is just being imaginative or playing joke on me, but it is worth mentioning my niece was born with some mental disabilities that really limited her ability to be creative or imaginative when she was little. She was always very sincere and very literal. The concept of make-believe just was not something she grasped well. So, it seemed unusual to me that she would make something like that up, but that is what I chalked it up to. I am a little creeped out, but I am glad she is using her imagination, so I play along and ask what they look like and what they're doing. She says it's an older boy and a little girl, and they're running around playing on the swing set and trampoline. I say, "That's nice. Sounds like they are having fun," and I lead her back out to the living room to watch TV, while I grab her little brother to give him his bath and get dressed for bed. After his bath, I am getting my nephew dressed in my sister's room. He starts doing the exact same thing staring out the window, and he immediately asks, "Who are those kids on the trampoline?" Now I am creeped out. "What kids?" I ask. "The tall boy and little girl. They are playing on our trampoline. They shouldn't be playing on our trampoline." My nephew got really frustrated when I tried to insist nobody was outside. I was just like, "Okay, I'm done," and calmly noped out of there with my nephew. They were both so sincere about what they were seeing and were in separate rooms on opposite ends of the house when each one made their comments about what they saw outside. I really do not know what to make of it. That was not the only weird stuff that happened in that house either. I know there is a rational explanation for everything, but it still creeped me out. Way back in the day when building plastic airplane models were a thing, my brother saved up his allowance for a month to buy this certain kit. The day he brings it home my mother and father tell us we must go to the grocery store, and we set off for the supermarket. On arrival back home my brother races up to his room to start his model while the rest of us unpack the car. A few seconds later he come into the kitchen with a weird look on his face, not frightened but not okay either. He asks us, "Is this a joke?" We all have no idea what he is talking about and ask him what is going on. He repeats, "Is this some kind of joke?" almost yelling it at us. My mom now realizes he is serious and grabs him by the hand and asks what is wrong. My brother turns and says, "Very funny guys. What did you do, buy another model and swap mine out for it?" My dad laughed and said, "No, what are you talking about?" My brother rushes upstairs to his room and flies back down, this time with a fully glued and painted model, the exact same one he purchased before. The box is shredded on his bedroom floor. My parents turn white, call the neighbors to see if anyone was seen on the property and start checking the rest of the house. Nothing else was touched, no doors were unlocked, all windows sealed. This was not the only odd thing that would happen there, but I remember it vividly because of my parents' reaction. There is no humanly viable way that model was built, glued, and painted in the time we were gone from the house. I would assume a prank by my dad who has that kind of humor, but it was the only time I have ever seen him seem scared. He has never admitted to it in 30+ years. When I was in high school we used to play this stupid game, we called Michael Myers. It was just hide and seek but in the dark. You had to play at night with no lights on and the curtains drawn, no sounds playing, and Michael Myers had to wait in the basement for a few minutes while everyone hid. One night we decide to play while my mom is out working. It was my brother, a few of my cousins, my friend, and my little sister was 6 or so at the time. After a few rounds I am found first and must be Michael. I do not like being the seeker alone, so I ask if my friend can do it with me. Everyone was fine with it, so we go and sit in the basement and wait. It is important during this part that you remain silent so you can hear where people are running to give you an advantage. After the 5-minute wait time we left the basement and stood in the office for a minute to let our eyes adjust to the dark. We left the office after searching briefly and went into the dining room. From the dining room you could see into the kitchen in the left and the living room on the right. We were sure we heard everyone run upstairs, so we started heading to the living room when my friend said my sister was hiding on top of the fridge. I look over and she was peering through the doorway from on top of the fridge. You could see her hair hanging and she was small. I assumed my brother put her up there as a joke because she could not get up there herself. I told my friend that we would just ignore her because she could not be seeker anyway. So, we went upstairs to find everyone else. We found my cousins first. My brother was particularly good at this game, and since we knew where my sister was, we just gave up searching and yelled that he could come out from hiding. We switch on some lights, and he came out of hiding with my sister. My friend immediately started freaking out and asked my brother if she had been with him the whole time because we saw her on top of the fridge. My brother ran downstairs turning the lights on as he went, but there was no one down there. He checked everywhere in the house. No one. I really felt like he had to have been messing with us, but we would have heard someone moving around. The house was seriously dead quiet. I have tried to figure out everything it could have been beside my sister, but I just do not know what it was. It is not a great memory and still gives me goosebumps. I never played the game again and was never comfortable in that house after that. When I was about 10, I was spending time together with my younger brother, 8 at the time, and our neighbor, also 8M, in our house on a normal Saturday afternoon. It was starting to get dark outside, and we had the brilliant thought to break out the new Ouija board my brother had gotten as a present recently. We went upstairs to my brother's room, turned off the lights and drew the curtains, and unboxed the Ouija board, which was glow-in-the-dark. Growing up, my brother had 3 small paintings hung on his wall which were depictions of winter, summer, and fall, had been hung solidly for at least 6 years when this story takes place. This is important later. We started messing around with the Ouija board, with one of us kids obviously pulling on one end of the planchette to manipulate answers. Eventually, we asked, "Are there any spirits here?" and the planchette moved to yes, with no obvious manipulation from any of the 3 of us. This was spooky, so we asked, "Do you want us to stop?" and the planchette moved to yes again. Immediately after this, the painting on the far left inexplicably falls bizarre and the glass on it cracks. We freak out, turn on the lights, my mom comes upstairs and reassures us that it is fine, there are no malevolent ghosts, just a coincidence, whatever. We calm down, my mom leaves to continue making dinner, and we shrug and turn the lights back off to continue playing with the Ouija board. We keep asking it questions and getting nonsense answers until we ask, "Are you angry?" The planchette moves to yes, with no pulling from anyone, right as the painting right next to the one that just feel bizarre also inexplicably falls to the ground, this time shattering the glass. This made us fully freak out. Mom comes upstairs and puts the Ouija board away, and I have never played with one since. Our house was old, but there was no other paranormal kind of activity, nor do I really believe in ghosts or anything, but this experience was just too strange and creepy to explain. The paintings continued to hang simply fine for years after that. When I was a teen, my dad bought and sold salvaged cars as a side hustle. I would drive whatever was in our driveway at the time as my way to get around. He got this one car that I used to joke was haunted because the electric door locks would lock or unlock on their own, making an audible chi sound. And because the car had been in an accident since it was salvaged. One day while driving with a friend I joked about the haunted car. As a joke I said aloud, "If there's a ghost in here, make it lock right now," and, "Chi, coincidence." As a joke I said, "Okay, but if it's not a coincidence, do it twice in a row, Chi." I then said, "Ha, I said twice in a row, Chi." It had never done that before. I stopped asking the car for things. I used to live in a cheap, sketchier, and older neighborhood. My room was upstairs, and I had a window facing my backyard. There were some leftover items from the last renters that I found, planks of wood, tools, and even a rusty butcher knife planted into the ground. The backyard had no fence surrounding it at all, and my parents needed to build one. I remember waking up many nights hearing footsteps in the backyard. They would walk slowly, always leading up to directly below and facing my window. I never looked, but I sensed that I was being watched. Then they would simply walk away. I told my parents desperately, but there was not really anything that they could do. A phone was found in our backyard around that time, and we returned it an unsure character saying that he was chasing after his dog and must have dropped it. Once a fence was built, I never heard the footsteps again. Sorry, I am a terrible storyteller. When I was younger, around 7 or 8, my mother, brother, and I were living in an incredibly old flat in a city a few hours from London. It is an old place and there are slave trade memorials all over the city, especially close to where we lived. I used to have terrible night terrors, so my mum moved me into her bedroom. I remember it very clearly. It was a large room, and her bed was to the right of me, while my bed was vertical and facing the bedroom door. It was small, smaller than a regular single, and had metal railings all around it, no clue but I remember it always made me feel safe. I do not know how soon after I moved into my mum's room it started, but someone began visiting me. I say someone because this did not appear to be an entity or otherworldly creature, it looked like a man. Every night, I would lie awake clutching the covers desperately and waiting for him so I could scream. Do not ask me why I did not scream first. In my child brain I was afraid if I screamed before I saw him, he would be mad. Every night I would hear boom. Boom. Boom, which was the sound of his boots on the stairs. He walked very slowly, so there was always about a 2-second gap between each step. Does not sound long, but consider how quickly you walk up the stairs. The boom of his boots would continue until he reached top, where he would slowly turn into my room. His boots would suddenly not make any noise, as if he were not even touching the floor. He was gray and faded, like a watercolor. He wore a straw hat that he had tipped over his eyes, so the top of his face was hidden, plus his head was always slightly bent forward as if he was looking at the floor. He wore dungarees and a shirt underneath that appeared tattered, and in his mouth was some kind of piece of hay or long grass or something, which he chewed as he walked. He would make his way slowly to my bed, not looking up or changing pace, and the scariest part was I never could tell if he knew I was there or not. I could not tell if he was just coming in my room because he wanted to be in that room or was there for me. Either way it was terrifying. I mention I had night terrors before, because when I first saw him, I thought he was a night terror. But then I started staying awake, and I waited for him because I was too scared to fall asleep and wake up with him stood over me. I know he was real. I felt him, I felt the presence of another person, I heard him, and I saw him. I would blink and then look, blink, and look, and he would still be there walking. Before he could get too close, I would scream, my mother would wake up, and I would tell her he had come. Eventually she went to my granddad, her dad, for help. She was genuinely scared and did not know what to do. I was scared in the day and scared at night. I was a wreck. She is not a religious person per se, but she is highly spiritual. They believed he was a slave. I do not know exactly what they did, but I was not allowed in that room for a couple of days. My mother had frankincense and some other herbs, and they spent time in the room speaking light and positive incantations. She asked whoever he was not to harm me, and to leave because I was afraid. After that he never came back, it was like he had never been there. I am 27 now, it is not exactly blood-curdling fear like it was back then, but every now and then if I am in a room and walk into a dark hallway, I shudder thinking about him, and where he really came from. I live in an apartment with an area people leave free things to take. I was going through a bad patch, and I decided to force myself to at least walk down the stairs and get the mail, just for the exercise. I came down and I saw this painting someone had left. The best way to describe it is if someone drew a dog as a human on a yellow background with big anime eyes. I do not know why, but it made me feel slightly better, so I took it up to my apartment. For the next few days, I felt like I was going insane. Like there was a voice in my head screaming all the time asking me to save it. It seemed terrified. One day I had an intense nightmare, and my mom woke me up and I saw her eyes look like the painting, but I honestly did not connect the two until my friend reminded me about the painting. I kept forgetting I had that painting for some reason. Eventually I put it back downstairs, but even that was difficult. It felt wrong, and I just felt like something was screaming into my head, terrified, the entire time. The second I put it back and went upstairs, everything went back to normal. It was gone from the area the next day, but it would come back every few days and disappear like people were taking the painting and leaving it again. Then it just disappeared. I showed people pictures of that painting, and no one understands why I wanted it. I do not even understand. It just seemed nice. When I was growing up, my family lived in a small 2-bedroom trailer. My older sister and I had one room while my parents shared the other. My mom was convinced that it was haunted. From her bed she could see an old reclining chair in the living room. Some nights she would suddenly wake up and see an old man sitting in it, staring out the window. She would always wake my dad up and send him to go investigate. He would stomp in the room and turn the empty chair around. This happened quite a bit. My sister also used to claim to see an old man standing in her closet. She was young enough that she does not remember much, so I do not have any more story there. Mom also swore that some days she would hear giggling and see a little blonde girl running down the hallway. At first, she would always assume it was me and go to investigate only to find the house empty. We moved out of that trailer after a few years. I did not know anything about this until years later when I was in college. One of my childhood friends and I were spending time together at my parents' place when a paranormal show came on. My dad made a joke about the wife in the show always sending her husband to investigate noises in the middle of the night before following it up with, "Who does that sound like?" After some prodding I got my mom to tell the story. She sticks by her story and believes to this day that, while the girl's spirit was friendly, the old man seemed malicious. If the story stopped there, I would say it could just be my mom having an overactive imagination. However, my friend seemed freaked out by the story. She asked my parents where the trailer was. We lived in a small village, so it was not hard to pinpoint, and it turns out that one of her brother's best friends bought the trailer from the older couple that my parents had sold the place to. The whole family swore the place was haunted. They always talked about how a spirit of an old man would sit in a chair in the living room and stare out the window. The trailer passed through a number of different hands before burning down a few years ago. I have a few other weird stories, but this one is by far the hardest for me to explain.
This happened when I was 25 and pregnant with my first son. It was January and my sister was visiting us, helping get the nursery ready, etc., etc. She was a practicing Wiccan at this time and mentioned she had to perform a spell at a particular time. My husband and I, not Wiccans and do not believe in Wicca, say sure, no problem. She goes into the nursery to do her thing and my husband and I go downstairs to start dinner. Suddenly, all the power in our house goes off. Everything. My husband yells at my sister who says sorry, I called on all the powers of the universe. He goes to the basement, checks the breaker box, newly installed by a professional, and discovers every single breaker has been tripped. He flips the breakers back on, we laugh, haha, what a funny coincidence, and go back to making dinner. Then she does it again. Again, all breakers are tripped and all power is off. She apologizes again and says she will change the spell. No problems after that. Later, she tells me the spell was for my son to be born on the 24th. My due date was February 28th, and she wanted him to be born on her birthday, February 24th. Instead, he was born January 24th, 6 weeks early. I had no complications, no diabetes, high blood pressure, anything. It was a completely normal pregnancy, except my water broke and I had him early. She apologizes and says she did not specify the month. She adds that she was glad she performed the spell in January, not December like she was originally planning. Fast forward 2.5 years, and I am pregnant with my second son. Both my husband and I have told her no spells. She agrees. Then, the day I have my son, my sister admits she did say a spell that my boy would be born on either Monday or Wednesday evening so she could be there and not miss classes. She was in stenographer school at the time. He was born on Wednesday evening. I am now 43 and still have no rational explanation for any of it. All I know is it gives me serious creepy crawlies when I think about it.
Many years ago, when I was a teenager, I went to a secluded beach with some friends. We had been spending time together at the water, picking shells and such like for most of the evening, and when it started to get very dark, we decided to head back. We had walked quite a way down the beach, and we could not see very well where the path back up to the road was, so I said I had run up onto the sand dunes and look around to see where we were. When I got to the top, I could see the path was not too far away from where we were, so I made my way back down to let the gang know. I could see them sitting on a sand dune a few feet ahead of me, facing the sea, and I called out to them, but they did not turn around. So, I made my way down through the dunes until I was right beside them and said, "Hey." The person turned around and it was not my friends, but a middle-aged woman, who was just looking at me with an expressionless stare. I apologized for nearly landing in on top of her, and then when I glanced over at the two people beside her, I realized that it was not two people, but big tufts of grass that my eyes had mistaken for the outline of people in the dim light. When I looked back to the woman, she was still looking at me with that same blank expression. I started to move away from her, and as I did, her face started to dissolve away into the sand. My heart nearly stopped there and then, and I nearly tumbled down the rest of the way through the sand dunes. My friends had been standing just a few feet away. It was just my brain playing tricks on me in the half-light, but I saw her face so clearly. It has been over 20 years, and I think if I saw her again, would recognize her. I grew up in Mexico City during the time of the horrendous 1985 earthquake. At the time, it was my older sister, my older brother, mom, dad, the dog, and myself. We lived on the upper floors of an apartment building overlooking some hills, stores, and other similar residential buildings. One afternoon, my older brother and I were playing without toy cars on the windowsill of one of the rooms. Cannot recall if it was my parents' bedroom or ours. The windowsill, something like this for reference, faced the street and there was busy daytime traffic with all the goings-on of the city below us. The room that we were in was adjacent to the corner of the building, if that makes sense. As we are going about your day, something catches my attention from the corner of my eye outside the corner of the window. Now, we are not street level, and whatever this was, I knew was out of place. I freeze, staring toward the man that is steadily climbing up the exterior wall of the building. As he comes into full view, I get a good look at his features: gray, glassy eyes, pale skin, long hair, long dirty nails, sharp features, as if his jawline, nose, ears, had this sharp angular appearance to them, and his clothes, this is the part that really stuck with me, he had on this long coat, a vest, with a white shirt underneath, and a top hat. I remember thinking that his clothes looked like they were covered in soot or smoke. My gaze is completely transfixed on this man, and I tap my brother's arm, who unbeknownst to all this was still playing next to me, and he immediately looks and freezes in place. It is at this point that the man, who had been staring straight up, stops, turns, and looks at both of us and smiles. Jesus Christ, his smile, his teeth were dirty in much the same way that his clothes were, but they looked sharp, like as if his entire mouth were made of fangs. Still smiling, he raises his index finger to his mouth in a sh motion. He then turns toward the wall again and continues his ascend. As he passes us by, we both do not recall seeing a rope or any instruments he could have been using to make the climb. My brother runs to get our mom, but by the time she got there, this person was long gone. To this day, we still remember this experience, my brother and I having experienced it, and our mom recalling how struck we were that day. It wasn't years later, perhaps 8 years or so, when one day we are all having dinner, now having moved to a new house in the US, when my brother froze in place and looking toward the living room next to the kitchen said that he saw a very tall, three-dimensional shadow of a man, wearing a long coat and top hat just standing there. Approximately 5 years ago, I had the inclination to look up "dark shadow man in top hat" on Google and was shocked to see this. Back in 1997 I was a UK student. After my first 2 years of university, as my grades were not up to the mark, I struggled to get a job for my third-year placement, so I therefore took the opportunity to work and study in America, or more specifically at Black Hawk College, Quad Cities, Illinois. At the time there was a new venture where a local businessperson was looking for international students to live in his new student accommodation at an old convent/girls' school called the Villa de Chantal. Google the picture. Say the place gave the chills was an understatement, and I could not wait to leave the place in the end. Set the context: the building was laid out with a wing on each end and a main area where there were small businesses who rented out rooms. I stayed in the wing where the nuns used to sleep, and it was big enough for just a bed and desk, but it comfortable enough. The other wing was where the old girls' school was situated that had been closed about 20 years previously. It had never been emptied though, and still had all these small children's desks set up as if they were still being used, apart from a good few inches of dust. The whole building just reminded me of the hotel in The Shining. I often heard footsteps on the floor below me at night, even though it was just me and a Russian student who lived there, and he was even more creeped out by it than me. However, apart from the ongoing noises, continuously cold rooms even though it was 100 degrees outside, no air conditioning, and relentless sense of being watched and followed was the following. In what was being used as a computer room for us to study in, there was desk situated in front of a stud wall. However, as I was going to be spending a lot of time in there, I thought I would reposition the desk to be by the window. What I had not realized, however, was that when I moved the desk it was attached to the wall by a couple of screws, so when I pushed too heavily on the desk it ripped it from the wall. As I did not want to get caught, I thought I would just leave it where it was. However, when I was about to move it back again, I saw some colored writing behind the wall. With my interest piqued, I moved the desk further away from the wall, and behind there I saw the words that will stay with me forever. In red crayon it said, "The more you worship me, the more I will pray for you." This did not seem too creepy, but it was the way it was written that did it. It was more jagged rather than smooth, angrier if you will. This me up, and I lived next to this room for a further 8 months. I learnt later that this room was the penance room, which was used by the nuns when they had to repent and seek forgiveness. The second thing that I really hated was the room right above the main entrance that was behind, hired by a small local bridal boutique. During the day it was fine, ladies coming to look at dresses for their wedding and such, but it was at night that it got creepy. The building manager used to shut off the main central building from the two end wings each evening and turned off all the lights for both the main area and the school wing, just leaving the lights on in my end of the building. For most of the time I stayed at the Villa de Chantal, I had a girlfriend and a couple of good friends who I liked to go out drinking with. I had just turned 21, so I was making the most of it. When I used to go out for the evening, the lights in the bridal boutique would be off. However, every time I came back later there was always a light shining in the room directly onto a wedding dress in the window. At first, we all thought it was a bit of a joke by the building manager, and she would not believe me, as when she came into work the following morning the light was always off. It was about 2 months later that we all went out for a party and the building manager gave me a lift back on the night. Lo and behold, the light was on. She turned very white and said she would have to turn the light off and asked if I would go in with her. Once inside, through the locked doors, we went directly to the room, but when we turned the handle into the room and walked in, the light was off. It was at this point that her car alarm went off and she crapped herself. After that day she never went into that room again and always left work by 5 p.m. I on the other hand continued to live there for another 5 months and ensured that I had a lock put on my room door. I heard years later that the building burnt down and is now a primary school. I cannot help but wonder if the kids who go there now sense anything or whether it was just my imagination.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.